In this video, you're going to be installing and setting up React Router. By the end, your React app will have multiple pages. Each page will show its own React component. Now, before we actually install React Router with yarn add in the terminal, I do want to make you aware of where you can learn more about this tool over on the web. So the React Router documentation can be found by Googling React Router. And we're looking for their GitHub repository page. The organization name is React Training and the library is React-Router. Once we're there, you can see that there's not a whole lot here. This is really just a set of links that we can click to get out to more information. And what we're going to do is just click the one up at the very top. We're going to go to reacttraining.com/React Router. Now, React Router is a tool that can be used in a few different environments. We can use it natively for Android or iOS. We're concerned primarily with the web though. So if you do want to learn more about how to use React Router, or you forget how something works, or you're just curious, this is where you want to go. It contains a lot of complete examples, a lot of guides that talk about exactly why things work the way they do, and we also have the complete API outlining every single thing that the React Router library exposes for you to use. So we're going to be going through a lot of this stuff. For example, redirecting based on authentication, setting up 404 pages, handling URL parameters. These are all things we're going to need for our new advanced application. But step one is to just install things. So let's go ahead and knock that out by switching over to the terminal. I'm going to shut down the dev server and clear the terminal output. We'll be using yarn add to add the library, and the library is called React Router. Now, React Router itself includes all of the code to work both natively on Android and iOS and in the web. If you're just working with native or you're just working with web apps like we are, there's actually a other library we can install. That is React Router DOM. This just includes the React Router setup for people using React Router in the context of a web app. If you're just using it in the context of a native app, you can use React Router Native. We're going to be installing React Router DOM, and we're going to grab the most recent version. That's 4.1.2. Hey, it's Andrew from the future. I do recommend you install version 4.2.2 instead, which does have explicit support for React v16. This version works with React 15 or React 16. Version 4.1.2 doesn't have explicit React v16 support. So make sure to run this command instead. The API is exactly the same. There are just a few changes behind the scenes. Let's go ahead and jump right back in. I'm then going to go ahead and add this as a dependency to my project, and once it's added, we can work on actually importing it and using it. The installation went well. I'm going to clear the terminal output and use yarn run dev server to start up that development server once again. We can then switch over to the browser and switch back into Visual Studio Code and actually kick things off, and we're going to be doing that inside of app.js. In here, we're going to focus on creating multiple pages for the Expensify application. Step one is to import stuff. We're going to be importing stuff from the new tool we just installed. Now, there are a series of named exports we're going to be grabbing, and we're going to be grabbing all of them from React Router DOM. Now, exactly what exports we can grab are clearly defined over in the documentation. So over here, if we stick to the React Router Getting Started guide, and we scroll down, under the API section, we can see the various things available to us. We have a bunch of React components we can use. Just like React Modal gave us the modal component, React Router DOM gives us a bunch of components related to routing. We have browser router, hash router, link, nav link, prompt, memory router, all of these things, and they can all be accessed via the named exports. So all we're going to do for the moment is grab this one, browser router, and we're also going to be grabbing route, which is defined down below. To get that done right here, the first one is just browser router, matching up the name exactly, and the other one is route. We're going to be using browser router once to create the new router, and we're going to be using route for every single page. We're going to provide things to route like the path we want to match for and what we want to do when the user visits that path. So let's go ahead and actually get this done down below. Now, the syntax for using React Router can be really weird at first. So what we're going to do is just set up a const right here. We're going to call this one routes, and we're going to set it equal to some JSX. Now we actually define the router configuration for our application right inside of JSX. We create a tree-like structure using all of the things from React Router DOM, and that lets us clearly define exactly how our application should render based off of the current URL. And for now, all we need to do is create a new instance of browser router. We're going to create just one instance with a separate opening and closing tag because we are going to be adding some children inside, just like we saw with our own components and just like we saw with React Modal in the previous project. At this point, we actually have a completely valid router set up, and we can go ahead and get our router used by rendering it to the screen. So React Router is not going to actually render anything visible when we use the router. We're going to have to define individual routes using route, but that's not required. So for the moment, we could just take our JSX and dump it into React DOM.render like we've done dozens of times in the past. The end result over inside of the Expensify app is an empty screen. Now, if we open the console, we can see there are no errors. So this isn't an empty screen because we've misused the tool. It's just an empty screen because we haven't provided any instances of route. And that's how we set up the individual pages that make up our application. So if I want a home page and an about page and a contact page, I need to use route 3 times to set up those 3 pages. Unlike Browser Router, when we use route, we are indeed going to be providing some props. So let's take a look at exactly how that's going to work. Right here inside of Browser Router, we're going to define an instance of route, and there are no need to pass children in, so we don't need a separate opening and closing tag. All we need to do is specify a couple of props. So route is going to take 2 main things. We're going to take a path. What URL do we want to use for this route? And we're also going to take a component. When we match that URL, what should we show to the screen? Now to get these filled out, we're going to start with path. We're just going to set it equal to a string. And for the root of the application, what we have here, we just use /, even though the / doesn't show up by default. For component, we actually set it up as a JavaScript expression, and we reference a component that we want to show. In our case, we don't have one. Let's go ahead and define one in line for the moment. Right here, a const, and we're going to call this one expense dashboard page. It's just going to be a stateless functional component. So right here, we can use an arrow function, and we can implicitly return some JSX. There's no need to define a body and explicitly use the return keyword. And this one will just have a div. And inside of the div, we'll have some text. This is from my dashboard component. Now that we have a valid React component, we can actually pass it in as the value for the component prop. Right here, expense dashboard page, and this tells React Router that whenever it matches this path, it should render this component. Now we can go ahead and actually save app.js over here in the browser. We can see our page showing up. We are getting this is from my dashboard component printing. Now creating one route is fine, but the whole point of even using a router is to have multiple pages. So let's see how we can actually get that done. To get that done, we're going to be using route a second time. Now, the API for Browser Router expects the child, what we pass in between the tags, to either not exist or to have a length of 1. If we add another route right here, we're going to be breaking that. So what we're going to do is create a div, and we're going to put our other route in the div along with the current one. So I'm going to take the current route, cut it out, and paste it right here, moving the empty line. Excellent. So now we have a single element inside of Browser Router as it expects, and we can expand out what's inside of the div to be as complex as we need. What we're going to do is add another route right here alongside of the current one, still inside of the div. Right here, we're going to set up an instance of route, and we're going to go ahead and provide those exact same props. We need to tell it when to actually match this route, and when it matches the route, what do we show? We show whatever component we reference. For this one, we're going to create our page that allows users to add new expenses, and that URL is going to be /create, and the component that we're going to be rendering is just going to be a dummy component for now. I'll actually just take this guy, duplicate it, and change the details. I'm going to copy that code, paste it down below, and instead of expense dashboard page, we're going to change it over to add expense page, and we'll also tweak the text from this is my dashboard component to this is my add expense component. And that's just going to allow us to differentiate between the two when we see them over in the browser. Now at this point, I saved things and you can see we're actually getting an error because I haven't finished things off. Failed prop type, invalid prop component of type Boolean. We need to supply the actual component. So React Router is complaining, and it's only complaining because we set up component, but we haven't finished our code. So let's go ahead and actually finish things off by setting an equal to a JavaScript expression and referencing the component we just created. Add expense page. Excellent. Now, if we go ahead and save app.js, the browser is going to refresh. We can see we have no errors, which is great. And you can also see we're getting exactly what we expect. We have our "this is my dashboard" component showing up. We do not have "this is from my add expense" component showing up because we're not on the create page. For the moment, we don't have a way to link between the two. So what we need to do is just manually change the URL. And this is where things are going to get a little bit weird. Let's switch over to /create. I'm going to hit enter, and what do we get? We get cannot get /create. So what exactly is happening here? If we scroll down, we can see that the browser was trying to hit this page on our server, and that page didn't exist. So it's not actually using client-side routing. It was using the server-side routing for that first page load. And we already talked about that. The first time we visit our application, the browser needs to grab the initial HTML and load the JavaScript before it can do anything, before the React Router code even runs. And that's exactly what's happening here. The browser is trying to fetch this from the server. The server is saying it doesn't exist, and the end result is this showing up. What we need to do is make a tweak to our dev server configuration. What we have to do is send back index.html for all routes. So if I go to the root of my application, I want to serve up index.html and let React Router figure out what should get shown to the screen. If I go to /create, I want to serve up index.html and let React Router determine what should get shown to the screen. So in order to do that, we have to make a small change to Webpack config in order to actually tell the dev server to always serve up the index.html file for all unknown 404s. All we have to do is provide one new attribute onto the dev server object. This one is called history API fallback, and we have to set it equal to true. This tells the dev server that we're going to be handling routing via our client-side code and that it should return this page for all 404 routes, like /create. We'll learn how to handle this in production later on when we actually deploy our apps. For now, though, this is going to get the job done. Now, we not only have to save this file, we also have to restart the dev server. Over in the terminal, I'm going to shut down the current one and boot it up once again. And this time around, if we head over to the browser, we should be able to refresh things and it should work. So we're going to get a 404. The dev server is going to see that. And since we set this property, it's going to return index.html. Index.html is going to load the bundle, which loads for every single page. That's going to actually run our router code. It's going to determine that the URL is create, and it is going to show add expense page. So let's go ahead and actually do that. We refresh the browser, and what do we get? We get some pretty strange output. We get "this is from my dashboard" component, and we get "this is from my add expense" component. So we actually have both components showing up. We have the add expense page component showing up, which we did expect, but we also have the expense dashboard page showing up, which we probably did not expect to have showing up. So what exactly is going on? When React Router matches our paths, it just cares if the path at least starts with whatever we have. So for example, does /create start with /? Yes, it does. So that's considered a match. Does /create /other start with /? It does. It also starts with /create. So if we visit this page, what do we get? We get the exact same thing. Now, this can be useful in some situations, but it can also cause a lot of problems like we're seeing here. So how do we overcome this? We overcome this with another prop we can add on to route. So if we head over to the documentation, we have route right here. We already specified component and we already specified path. The one we're going to be using is exact. When we set exact equal to either true or false, it changes how matching works. So for our purposes, we can go ahead and add the prop onto the first route, setting exact its value is false by default. When we set exact equal to true, it's only going to show the expense dashboard page if the path exactly matches this, which means that it is not going to render for the create page because the path keeps going. So right here, we have /create. We have this is from my add expense component. And if I go to the root of the application, we have this is from my dashboard component. So there we have it. We have 2 routes set up. It is going to be your challenge to add 2 more. You're going to be adding a edit page. That'll be /edit. And you're also going to be adding right here a /help page. So for edit, you can call the component something like edit expense page. And for help, you can call it help page. So it's going to be your job to create 2 dummy stateless functional components with the correct names. Then you're going to define 2 routes down below the create route. And you don't have to use exact for these 2. You can just use the same setup we have here for this one. You're going to specify the path, you're going to specify the component, and then I want you to test your work. So actually visit /edit, make sure the edit expense page component shows up. Actually visit /help and make sure the help page component shows. Take as much time as you need to get this done, and when you are done, go ahead and click play. All right, let's go ahead and knock this out. We're going to start with the edit page. The first thing you needed to do was either create the component or start knocking out the route config. I'm just going to make the component first by copying the old one and pasting it down below. For this one, instead of add expense page, we'll call it edit expense page. And I'll also change add over to edit inside of the text so we can differentiate between the 2 over inside of the browser. Now that we have the component in place, we can actually use it right here. I'm going to make another instance of route under the other 2. And I'm going to define the 2 things we need. We need a path and we need a component value. For the component, we're going to reference the component we just created. That is the edit expense page component. And for the path, we're going to be using the one I told you to use, which was /edit. Now, at this point, we can test our work. And if we are correct, we'll move on to the help page. So right here, we have the home page. If I go over to /create, we have the create page. If I go over to /edit, we have the edit page showing up. This is from my edit expense component. So we're halfway done. Let's go ahead and knock out the help page by creating the component first. I'm going to copy the edit expense page component and just change its name over to help page. And I'll also change the text over to this is from my help component. And then we just need to create the route config down below. So I'm going to go ahead and set up a new instance of route like we do for every single page we want to set up. We're going to provide the path, which is /help. And we're going to provide the component to render when we match that path. In our case, it's going to be the help page component. Now we can go ahead and test our work. I'm going to remove the comments, save the file, and move over to /help. /help. And right here, we are getting, this is from my help page, which is fantastic. We now have 4 routes set up. We have 4 distinct pages that make up our application. We can render completely different things on all of them, as opposed to having to figure out how to jam everything into one page, which is what we did with the previous application. Now, at this point, we do not know how to create everything we need to create with the React Router tool, but we at least have the basics down. We have some place we can build off of. For example, we don't know how to redirect. We don't know how to link between pages. We don't know how to do things like set up a 404 page if they hit a URL we don't have set up, but that's okay. We're going to worry about all of that throughout this section. For now, let's just focus on the fundamentals. And to wrap this one up, I just want to take a quick moment to recap what we learned in this video. We started off by installing React Router DOM and grabbing the browser router and route. Down below, we used both of those to create the router configuration for our application. Just a single instance of browser router is required, and we set up as many instances of route as pages we have. So we have the path and the component. This is when we show it. This is what we show. That allows us to show something unique for each page. We also set up exact for the very first route. We saw that this would match these routes because they start off with the same thing. To fix that, we use exact. Now, we're only going to show the expense dashboard page at the root of the application. We're not going to show it for something like /help. Last up, we saw that our server wasn't well equipped to handle client-side routing because it wasn't sending back the HTML file for pages like /help. So when the browser went to do that initial page load, getting the HTML for the server, it failed. But we were able to fix that by setting one configuration option for the dev server. History API fallback, telling the dev server for all 404 pages, just send back the HTML file. We'll learn how to handle that on our own later on with production, but for now, this is a perfectly fine solution for development. That is it for this video. I will see you in the next one where we keep exploring React Router.